Obidike and his wife, Ngozi, had long yearned for the cry of a child to fill their home. But despite their fervent prayers and tireless efforts, the cruel hand of fate had denied them the blessing of a child. They sought solace in the arms of native doctors and the sterile corridors of hospitals, hoping against hope for a miracle that never came. Desperation gnawed at their hearts like a relentless beast, driving them to the brink of despair. They clung to the fragile thread of hope, willing to do whatever it took to fulfill their deepest desire. Finally, they turned to the ancient powers that dwelled within the depths of the river, seeking the aid of a goddess called Mama Nukwu, rumored to grant the most fervent wishes of the childless. With trembling hearts and trembling hands, they made their offering to the river goddess, beseeching her for a child to call their own. The priestess of the goddess, in her infinite wisdom, gave Obidike and Ngozi sad news. Prophecy has it they were destined to be childless. Ngozi cried. Feeling her pain, the goddess offered a dangerous alternative with serious consequences that hung heavy in the air like a shroud of darkness. She foretold that they would beget a daughter, but their joy would be short-lived, their happiness eclipsed by tragedy. Obidike would sleep with his daughter and kill her and her husband. When they got home, Ngozi cried every passing day, lamenting that she cannot stay barren forever. She told Obidike about her plans to accept the river goddess's alternative, one which Obidike considered a disaster. But after months of her brooding, crying, and overbearing attitude which shattered him into a million shreds, he gave in to her demands. He loved her more than anything in the world. Afterward, Obidike and Ngozi returned to the river priestess to perform the ritual that would hopefully break Ngozi's barrenness. It was an elaborate and costly ceremony, requiring a multitude of offerings, such as baskets of yams and kola nuts, kegs of palm wine, and many yards of precious fabrics. The ritual took place along the riverbanks, where the priestess, filled with spiritual fervour, danced and chanted incantations until she proclaimed the task accomplished. With hearts full of hope and mixed feelings, the couple returned home, anticipating their baby girl. Months passed, and Ngozi's womb swelled with the promise of new life. The joy that radiated from their home was palpable, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness that had once enveloped them. But as the day of their daughter's birth drew near, a shadow of fear loomed over Obidike's heart. The river goddess's warning echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain, filling him with a sense of dread that he could not shake. When the time came for their daughter to enter the world, Obidike stood by Ngozi's side, his heart heavy with uncertainty. And when their daughter was born, a beautiful and perfect gift from the heavens, Obidike's soul trembled with conflicting emotions. In that moment of purest joy, Obidike made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. He resolved to heed the goddess's warning to spare his daughter from the fate that awaited her. With a heavy heart and tears streaming down his face, Obidike made the ultimate sacrifice. He kissed his newborn daughter on the forehead, whispered his love into her tiny ears, and then, without looking back, he fled into the night, leaving behind his wife and child. Ngozi wept bitter tears for the husband who had abandoned her, for the daughter who would grow up without a father's love. But deep down, she understood the sacrifice that Obidike had made, the agonizing choice that had torn their family apart. Years passed, and the memory of Obidike faded like a whisper in the wind. But his sacrifice lived on in the heart of his wife, a silent testament to a love that knew no bounds. And though their path was fraught with hardship and sorrow, Ngozi and her daughter forged ahead, guided by the flickering light of hope that burned within their souls. For even in the darkest of times, love would always prevail, a beacon of light in the endless expanse of night. Many years later, their daughter got married to a man called Nnamdi. Adaeze's husband, Nnamdi, was a tyrant whose fists were as heavy as his heart was cold. He ruled their home with an iron fist, his words cutting deeper than any blade. For years, Adaeze endured his cruelty in silence, her spirit broken but not defeated. Time and again, when the bruises faded and the tears dried, Adaeze sought solace in the arms of her mother, a woman whose heart bled for her daughter's pain. But each time Adaeze returned to Nnamdi's side, her mother's tears mingled with her own, a silent lament for a daughter lost to the shadows. One fateful night, as the echoes of Nnamdi's rage reverberated through their home, Adaeze fled into the darkness of the forest, seeking refuge from the storm that raged within her soul. There, amidst the rustling leaves and the whispering wind, she stumbled upon a man whose eyes gleamed with the fire of intoxication. In her desperation, Adaeze found herself drawn to this stranger, his presence a balm to her wounded spirit. In the darkness of the night, they shared a moment of fleeting passion, their bodies entwined in a dance of desire and longing. But when the dawn broke and the shadows fled, Adaeze hurriedly left, feeling guilty while the stranger was sleeping. His face, shrouded in the half-light of the morning, haunted her. She returned to Nnamdi. Nnamdi, blind to the agony he inflicted upon his wife, continued to wield his fists like weapons, his words like poison dripping from his tongue. And yet, despite the darkness that enveloped her, Adaeze clung to a sliver of hope, a flickering flame that refused to be extinguished. It was during this point that Obidike did the unthinkable and decided to visit his wife Ngozi for the first time after over 20 years of leaving home without anyone knowing his whereabouts. He met her lying down in her hut, sad and depressed. She was so happy to see him after all these years. His heart broke into a million shreds when he looked intently at her. This was not the woman he married. Something was amiss. She didn't want to tell him. But he persuaded her until she told him about the beast their daughter's husband is. Obidike lost his cool and almost wanted to venture off to confront him, but Ngozi stopped him. He was reminded he was no longer the strong man he used to be. Age had caught up with him. Moreover, everyone presumed he was dead, including their daughter. Also, he had to stay away to avert the prophecy of doom. Obidike slept with her for the first time in so many years. It was magical, and for the first time in 2 decades, Ngozi slept like a baby. Afterwards, Obidike disappeared in the middle of the night for his home in the forest, leaving her on the bed, snoring in deep, exhausting sleep. Afterward, Obidike grew restless, and one day he tracked his daughter to her husband's house, and almost came out of hiding to confront the toxic man one day. He was beating her. That day, after Adaeze ran home to Ngozi, Obidike sneaked into her husband's house and poisoned his food on the table. He wanted the moron dead, but something terrible happened later that day. Perhaps it was fate, or a twist of fate. His daughter went back to her husband's house to pick some of her belongings, and ended up reconciling with her husband. They ate the poisoned food together and died in their sleep. After the tragic incident, the news of Adaeze and Nnamdi's deaths spreads throughout the community like wildfire. Ngozi, devastated by the loss of her daughter and her husband, confronted the priestess of the river goddess, who confirmed that Obidike was the culprit. It didn't make sense to Ngozi. How in heaven's name was he able to sleep with their daughter and murdered her and her husband? One day, while she was still mourning their daughter, Obidike came to see her, but she cursed him and poured hot water on him. Obidike, burdened by remorse and haunted by the consequences of his actions, retreats deeper into the solitude of the forest. He grapples with the weight of his choices, wrestling with the conflicting emotions of love, regret, and the overwhelming desire to atone for his sins. Meanwhile, Ngozi is consumed by anguish and self-blame, tormented by the realization that her husband's actions have shattered their family irreparably. She mourns not only the loss of her daughter, but also the betrayal of trust and the fractured bonds that once held them together. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the community came together to offer support and consolation to Ngozi, recognizing the profound grief and suffering she now bears. Knowing the entire story from both parties, they desired to make amends between the couple. Make amends, they urged, for Adayizi's sake. But the scars of the past remain etched in Ngozi's hearts. How could she make amends with the memory of a man who'd shattered their family with his betrayal? One stormy night, Ngozi felt sad and conflicted. Suddenly, there was a loud crack of thunder, making the house tremble. Someone pounded on the old door. Fear gripped Ngozi's throat, and she refused to answer. The pounding grew more frantic and desperate. A voice called out, "Ngozi, it's me, Obidike." Silence filled the air. Finally the door creaked open a bit. Ngozi stood there, her face showing pain and sorrow. Rain poured down her face, mixing with her tears. "Why?" she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. Obidike didn't reply. He pushed past her and sat heavily on a chair. The storm outside matched the turmoil inside the room. Ngozi spoke, her voice cold. "Tell me, Obidike, why did you do this to us?" He looked up, his eyes red and empty. "There's no excuse," he said hoarsely. "I made a terrible mistake. One night, I was drunk, and I did something I regret deeply." He confessed his wrongdoing, his guilt filling the room. Ngozi listened quietly, her face unreadable. When he finished, silence hung heavily. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she finally said, her voice breaking. "You've destroyed everything we had." Obidike flinched. "I know," he said softly, "and I wish I could undo it all." There was no comfort in his words, only the pain of regret. As the storm outside calmed down, something shifted inside the room. Ngozi wasn't ready to forgive him, but as the storm passed, she seemed to understand his pain a little better. As he prepared to leave, Ngozi stopped him. "Wait," she said. He turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. "Stay," she said, her voice tired. "Not because I forgive you, but because we need to face this together." Tears filled Obidike's eyes again, this time with a hint of gratitude. He sat back down, and they sat together in silence. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start, a beginning where they could face their pain together.